go take really desirable things, not crappier things. Like you want a hamburger, what was a hamburger at Disneyland? And what is it, 50 years ago was a hamburger at Disneyland now, right? Not a hamburger at a crappier restaurant where you go and press the buttons and talk to a robot to order it. I mean, the same comparable experience today as you'd have 50 years ago. It's massively different. And if you look at even, just desirable assets across the world, I don't mean your house in Edmonton. We live in Edmonton.
Yeah.
I mean your house looking at the harbor, your apartment looking at the harbor in Vancouver.
Sure.
I mean a house in Manhattan, a house on Miami Beach. That's the sort of appreciation that you get on that.
You saying my house in Edmonton is not a desirable asset? I'm offended.
Neither of our houses in Edmonton are desirable assets. I mean, they're desirable, and compared to big screen TVs, they're going to go up in value, right?
Yeah.
But they're unlikely to keep pace with pristine capital like gold.
Right.
That's just the reality of it. But you can make them work because they're easier to finance than gold is. So with leverage, they can turn into a good investment. But you have to know how to use the leverage to really extract the value out of it. But that's a boot camp talk. Let's dial it back to good old Tiffany here and his increases to why he did that rate. So essentially, we've only had an increase in the money supply of about 7.2%. That's resulted in the 2.2% CPI print, the fake government inflation. So that gets them to their target, of 2%. And so what happened during COVID is they increased the money supply. They goosed the money supply 18%. Okay, cash gets created in basically two ways. Like it either gets printed by the central bank. Okay, so the central bank literally hits a button, prints it, and they buy the bonds. And so they buy either government bonds or they buy commercial bonds.
Right. They don't literally print the money; they just buy the bonds.
They just buy. It's a keystroke. And then the money is actually also created by banks. Okay, when you put your dollar at the bank, they're going to lend it out 9 times. Like that. That's this is the increase to the money supply. It's by the central banks, and the commercial banks are actually increasing the money supply, and both are ultimately affected by the central bank policy. What's the interest rates? What can they actually offload in the bond market? And so that's kind of the policy that they manage. And so 18.3% was the biggest increase in the money supply. Oh, we got to go back. Was the biggest increase in the money supply since 1980.
Wow.
So, and that's why you had inflation in the 80s of such a high rate. So ultimately, it was no surprise that we had, CPI prints of, we had 3.4, 6.8. And you can see it's like, this is a very tough line. Like they really increased the money supply in 2008 to combat the financial crisis, but they got it to 14.1, and they actually did a pretty good job. Like this is a hard landing to stick. You're trying to. This is a gymnast flipping 38 times in the air and trying to come down and stick the landing. Like it's a hard thing to do, but they did a pretty good job there. And so when you overshoot, it's like a cup, right? It's like pushing a cup to the end of the table, and all of a sudden, if you push it, far enough, it's like the cup's balancing on the table. But if you push it too far, the cup goes all the way over, and the coffee's everywhere, right? Yeah. And that's essentially what happened. The difference between 14.1 and 18.3 was massive inflation. It's a very difficult assignment. But then after that, in 2021, they're still increasing the money supply by 8.5%, which is more than the historical average, right? And so I think it's good to delineate, 54 years of this system, but there was a lot of adjustment in the first years after coming off the gold supply. And so you start teasing out the last 25 years, the money supply is only going up by 7.2%. And so when you pump it through for 18.3% and then follow it up with 8.5%, you're going to have high CPI prints, okay? Then after that, they've overcorrected the other way. We've only increased the money supply by 3.5%, 4.2%, 4%, and so far this year, 3.5%. So you're talking an average of 3.8%. You're going to get falling inflation rates on a long enough time horizon. And this is the issue that people have to understand. At the end of the day, inflation is basically monetary. It's a monetary phenomenon. It doesn't matter how high tariffs are in the long term. In the short term, yeah, energy and tariffs are going to play a big role on potential what happens on CPI prints. But in a long enough time parameter, if you don't have any more cash, people can't pay more for that basket of goods.
Right.
They just can't, right? In the short term, they might borrow money, they might liquidate other assets, but in the long term, it's like if you don't increase the money supply, you're not going to get inflation. That's just the reality of it. It's pretend it's a fixed system. It's like you can't just continually keep paying more and more for goods. That's just not how it works. So are tariffs going to have an impact in the short term? Yeah, just like energy prices. They can have a pretty big impact in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to come back to the money supply, which has been very restrictive. And do they know that? Do they pay much attention to it? The critique of central bankers is they actually don't pay much attention to the quantitative theory of money, which is undefeated. So maybe their terms don't last long enough, or certainly their handlers, or their we'll call them their handlers, the independent government who both appoints them and ratifies them, right? So that's where we are. So the restrictive monetary policy is not likely to increase inflation. It's likely to cause it to go down, and that's why you see the inflation going down. Okay, and let's just put it in perspective. Like, why do I think that they changed course? Why do I think that they reduced rates? Because you have a job market that's not good. You had inflation that was coming down, and you had even more economic uncertainty on the horizon because of tariffs. But then as that economic uncertainty because of tariffs increases, you suddenly stop cutting rates. Okay, let's walk through that. And I'll explain that. And so this is, the historical Government of Canada rates. Okay, so we're at 2 3/4, and you can see that that's actually historically high the last 10 years. Okay. Mind you, you also have the U.S. They started decreasing rates too from 5.5 to 4.5. And they held at their last meeting. So they held at 4.5. They didn't cut at their last meeting. Then you had the European Central Bank, and they have increased to 2.4. And Trump was, sounding the horn. It's like, the ECB they're reducing rates. Why isn't Jerome Powell reducing rates? He's too slow. We got to fire the guy, right? In typical Trump fashion, they're at 2.4. Okay. And you just start looking at, like, around the world, what happens. It's like, it's always interesting, Switzerland. We always talk. I'm fascinated by Switzerland. They're just one of those outliers where they just kind of do their own thing, right? But then you have Singapore, the Euro area, Canada, South Korea, China, Australia. Okay, so what happens when you reduce rates? When you reduce rates, you drive down the value of your dollar. Okay, so I don't think this. I think this was politically motivated. I do, right? Some people would say, well, the fact that they didn't reduce rates was politically motivated. It's like, no, I'll show you why, right? Because by not reducing the rates, what happened here is you have the Canadian dollar today at 72 cents. And so when you reduce rates, you're going to increase the money supply, and you increase investment, you get the economy flowing. But all of those benefits are long-term. They're going to happen in the next 24 months from when you actually make that monetary policy change. And you could see that before with the inflation rates. Like, how long did it take before they increased the money supply that inflation ran out of control? It's like I don't even think it's a year. People say it's all within it's like, no, it's closer to 2 years before that works its way through the years. So if you were to decrease rates today, when rates were at their height, they're probably at the top of the news cycle, what the interest rates were. But they've fallen down the news cycle where people are talking about tariffs and unemployment, that even though things are all connected, most people, it's not top of mind anymore. Okay. But what you do have is you have an election coming up on April 28th. And so
we do.
You could reduce rates, which is, call it an issue that's, 3, 4, 5 down the list of priorities. And if you reduce rates, all the positive outcomes of reducing rates, they're in the future. They're after April 28th. But what happens more immediately when you reduce rates is the value of your dollar can go down pretty quickly. And so if you continue to reduce rates while your neighbor next door is holding their rates, if I'm Mark Carney, do I want to go into that election with 69 cents on the dollar, or am I pretty happy that I got 72 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to roll with that into April 28th? And so I know people will say that they're independent, but I'm not there, people. Sorry. Like, when you can appoint them, when you can ratify them, when arguably you can actually even fire them too, that's not independent. It's a fake independence.
No, 100%. So, and who used to be the head of the central bank in Canada?
Exactly. So you think he doesn't, that would be the most well-connected,
he knows.
Most well-connected prime minister to the central bank that there ever has been, right? And so why I think they didn't reduce rates, it's because they're happy going into April 28th with a 72 cents on the dollar Canadian dollar.
And I can probably, with 99% certainty, that he's got the personal phone numbers of Jerome Powell,
Tiffany.
Tiffany can call Jerome Powell. You can call
Macklem.
And then whoever is in charge of the UK, like European Union, he's got them all on speed dial, and he's talking with all of them.
He is the guy.
He's the guy.
And so they're leaving the door open to more aggressive rate cuts in the future, or certainly continuing. Hinting of more dovish tones, and even hinting that they would go aggressive if need be. But why they'll pause this time? 72 cents on the dollar is good for election day.
Yeah. That's about it.
That's
right?
it. Yeah. That's it. And how to we tell people, it's like, if you're really trying to understand it, like, how do people act? It's like normally in their self-interest.
Yes.
And so should they have continued to cut? Probably. Probably continuing cut certainly towards neutral, because basically 2.5, 2.25, 2.5 is basically neutral. Should they have cut? Was there any argument to not cut? Like, I don't see it. I think it was political, and I think it was because 72 cents on the dollar is better for election day, and that's what you have. That's the real reason that it happened, and that's a temporary thing that maybe people don't care. That becomes less important to them after April 28th.
Right. So now with this knowledge, armed with this knowledge, and right now we're just in an election cycle, waiting for April 28th, 29th. What happens after that? How do our people in our audience prepare for the next 24 months? Because like you mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast, it doesn't matter who gets voted in this time. You're not going to see within the next 4 years massive change. It's still going to be, you're going to be considerably poorer at the end of this 4 years, and there's no way to really change it. So what is the mechanism that they can do in order to, hedge against the jackassery that's going to go on?
It's the acquisition of desirable assets, and ideally the acquisition of desirable assets using reasonable and prudent debt. Like, that is how the average person kind of escapes the matrix in this scenario, because the solution is money printing. Where you can see Trump now is like openly adversarial to Jerome Powell. He wants his guy in there, and this time next year he's going to get his guy in there, and they're going to get rates down. And how are they going to act? In their self-interest, because they're going to get rates down. And then they're going to start campaigning in the summer of 2026 for midterm elections, and they're going to campaign with the money supply being goosed and asset prices going up and everyone feeling richer than they think. And that is the direction here. It's going to be an increase in the M2 money supply and the increase in desirable assets. And so it's people who act out of fear because they hear it's like the job market's not good. It's like there's only one way out, and it's money printing. There's only one way out, and it basically takes the wages. It takes your earning power and moves it to the people who own the stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so every dollar that you can move forward in a desirable asset and not put into that trailer loan for 20 years, Like it makes a difference. It makes a difference. Like even $100 a month makes a big difference for someone who's younger, right? Even $100 a month starting to acquire desirable assets. We teach what assets to acquire at the boot camp and up level people's knowledge. But if you know this, it's like it's a hard thing to know, because you know that the average Canadian, and for that matter, the average American, is going to be worse off in 4 years than they are today. And that's not the leadership. It's the monetary system. And the monetary system is so big and powerful right now that one leader changing it is kind of impractical, right? There's just very few things that they could do, like building massive resource projects in Canada. And in the U.S., like they actually have to actually change that monetary system, because we can't change that monetary system independently, because it's all based on the U.S. dollar. Like, what's our reserve asset in Canada? U.S. dollars. Like that is our reserve asset, right? And what is the U.S. dollars backed by? By some gold that supposedly still exists at Fort Knox, but no one's actually audited it in decades.
Yeah, oddly enough, they haven't done the audit on Fort Knox and the other storage facilities in the U.S. But that's for another podcast.
So this expansion is coming, and unfortunately, that's grim news that the average Canadian is going to be poor in 4 years, regardless of who gets elected. But there's a life raft sitting there, and the people who actually know how to do it, like the bigger the printing money that happens, the more glorious that island that you're headed to on that life raft. There's just not enough room for everyone in the life raft. That's the problem. But there is a seat, right? There is a seat. You won't get as far ahead as the people closer to the money supply, but there are cracks in the system where the average person can start getting ahead, and they can get access to good quality debt, and they can get access to good quality assets. But most of them are outside of the norm. If you just sit there and walk into RBC and you buy a balanced portfolio at 5%, it's like you're actually moving backwards. You're just moving backwards. Like that's it. And so you have to up level your education, because if you do that, you actually have a massive opportunity. And so I would think in the next 10 years, there's a massive opportunity to increase your net worth, but you have to increase your knowledge, and you have to start with where you are from what you have as soon as possible.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.